Welcome to the pirate feed of Motion Design Hotline. You're here in the off hours. Adobe Live is going on somewhere, but we're not on there right now. Here it's just us. Kyle, how are you doing?
Spectacular.
Great. Well, don't worry. Well, when I say just us, it's you, me, and a who. So hello. Thanks for jumping to the chat. We're going to be doing some isometric stuff. Isometric is my life. I push on every project I get so far. 2.5 isometric projects in 3 years. Pretty good ratio.
Maybe you should be doing this stream.
I know, right? So, as we say, today we are going to be looking into some isometric inquiries. Inquiring minds have sent us what they would like, so we are going to get into that question.
We definitely observed some of that question and didn't just go off on our own tangents at all.
Yeah. I mean, that is the seed which blossoms into the great tree of this show. So that's what we're going to be trying to cover today. So if you have any questions about isometric animation, come at us and we'll try to help you out if you're running into certain pitfalls. But hopefully the kind of systems that we outline here will answer most of the questions around this topic, I think. So
yeah. I think we kind of tried to approach this from a few different directions to kind of specifically answer Joseph's question. He's the one in the chat there. He's the one who asked this, which is great. But we also kind of wanted to make sure that we did sort of a broad coverage and give people enough pieces to kind of make their own,
make their own thing.
Make their own thing.
Now, Kyle, I did say that we weren't on Adobe Live, but apparently we are. We're getting multicast anyway, so we've hijacked the feed.
Yar.
Avast.
We should really wear pirate outfits when we're hoping for that to be the case.
Yeah, I mean, pirate is a state of mind, so any outfit you wear is a pirate outfit, if you really believe.
But it's more fun with a hook hand.
Yeah, and an eye patch. Well, pirate culture is not our costume, Kyle, so that's not what we're going to be doing today. So, folks in the chat, since there are many of you there, let us know if the audio sounds strange. I have my microphone in a different place today. We've been clicking some buttons inside of Zoom. I don't know what's going on. But, we're going to see. So you let us know. Oh, and one other thing, as a treat for producer Paco, we need to record this. So Kyle, hold on. Before we get started proper, I'm going to turn on OBS and I'm going to turn on recording in Zoom.
Yeah, it's probably okay that you missed the the beginning part.
Recording in progress.
That part can't be cut down into anything usable. Okay.
Oh, hi, Victoria.
Recording is on. Excellent. Okay, Victoria, what's going on over there? All right, so today on the program, we're going to get isometric. We're going to come at this from a different angle. We're going to give you our perspectives on it. We are going to turn and burn on these things. Kyle, are there any other things about turning or angles you want to mention?
I feel like you probably got them all. I'm a little intimidated that you had to take your jacket off. Like, this feels more serious than I was prepared to be here.
It's because the lights in my office are very warm. So that's what we're going to get into. Some isometric animations. Like I say, if you got questions, get asked in the chat. We want to help you out. If you have questions not related to this, please fill up our form. We want you to do that, or send them at us at EC Abrams, at Kylesaurus. Kylosaurus Rex out there on all the places. That's how we get all the stuff. Kyle, let's start with you.
Should we give them the URL of our real website for real people?
Oh, that's true. Real website for real people where you can download the files you're going to see us working with. MotionDesignHotline.com. .com. You know it's important because it's .com.
Yes.
I don't know. Anyway.
It definitely doesn't stand for .comedy.
No, of course not. No. We could have done .club. We could have done .pizza. We could have been so many things. It's 11 p.m. out there somewhere in the world. Where are you at? And to who? Let us know what time zone, what place. Dox yourself on here if you wish. But Kyle, we're going to jump into your screen.
Okay. Time to actually do things. Okay.
Yeah, time to make the donuts, as they say.
So I'll let this loop for a minute for anyone who didn't already see this example on the social media websites. So this is the little example that I made for us today, and this is 100% After Effects. So this is taking advantage of two different 3D rendering engines, which you have to be a little intentional to be combining them. And then, so the question we specifically got was about not just working isometrically, but being able to turn when you're working isometrically, and then also being able to incorporate things like glows and stuff like that. So, between the two of us, we kind of tried to touch that. And then, like I said, explore a few different options. So I'm going to show you some of the basics of just setting up the isometric view and how I opted to be able to move around and rotate like this. There are kind of a couple different ways you could approach it. And then Evan built stuff in Cinema4D. You could, of course, while working in After Effects, you could import Cinema4D models, or you could use third-party things like Element 3D, for example, or you could be doing this in the beta with the 3D model import. But I decided to avoid that this week because we talked about that a lot recently already.
That's true. That's true. People are getting tired of us talking about all these great features.
Impossible.
Yeah. All right. So let's see how the sausage gets made over here.
Okay. Yeah. So, the things that we're really looking at here is that you have a very specific view that's kind of offset, and you can see this better with the building, of course. Welcome to ISO City here. So the whole idea of this isometric view is that you kind of figure out exactly how to offset things so that you get these lines that never. It's kind of the absence of perspective, right?
Yeah.
The lines are never going to converge.
Well, that's true. And speaking of convergence, I want to shout out where the people are from. We've got Abilene, Texas. Is that an Abilene accent? I don't know. Transylvania.
I want you to... Go ahead.
Well, we also have Transylvania, Romania. I'm not going to do a vampire accent because I'm pretty sure people there don't sound like that. Of course, North Carolina, where vampires do sound like that. So
yes. like what you just said, or like traditional like Dracula vampires.
Yeah, like Bela Lugosi style.
Yeah,
that's a Carolingian accent.
Yeah, I agree.
We know.
Okay, so I think we're all kind of prepped here. So really, in After Effects, there's two different approaches you could take. You could build this completely flat and just kind of fudge everything by using kind of proper scaling and skewing and stuff like that, but that's not very flexible.
Right.
So the approach that I took here was to build everything in 3D, which is a lot more flexible, but takes more work and involves kind of getting into that can of worms that is, the world of 3D.
Right.
So let's just start kind of a blank canvas here, and I'll show you just like how I set this thing up. So to start out, I made a great big composition here, which is 6,000 by 6,000. And then there's just a shape layer on here with the grid effect. So you can see I have a big old grid, right? And I was like, well, I want this to be easy for myself. So I made my grid 50, okay? All these squares are 50 pixels. And so that way, when I'm trying to position things later, I know that as long as I don't like mess with the scaling of this floor, everything can sit at an even 50 or be sized to 50 pixels, and it will all fit together pretty well. So let's take this floor pre-comp and just drop it into this other composition. This, by the way, is just a 1080 by 1080, but this could be whatever appropriate size you want it to be. And then the key here is that you're going to make a camera. You're going to give it a very long focal length, and then you're going to set it to a specific angle. And the easiest way to do that is with a null object. So you're not messing with the camera angle itself. You're creating a null, parenting the camera to that, and then setting up that angle. So let's do that. I'll go ahead and create a new camera. And honestly, you can use kind of any of these values in here because we're going to offset it so much that it doesn't really matter. So I'll just hit OK. Okay. And I, of course, will need to make my floor 3D so that the camera can see it. And then I'm going to go ahead and create a new null object as well. And let's rename that ISO Cam Mover, something to that effect. We'll make that 3D as well. And then we're going to parent the camera to that null. Okay. So let's open up this camera real quick. And what we need is the position and the zoom. I'm going to hit SS just to save some space here. That's show selected, so I can only see these things. And while I could set this manually, I'm going to save myself a little bit of time by doing a quick expression on the zoom here. I'm going to type minus and then link to the Z value of my camera position. And so that way the zoom is always going to be exactly the same distance as my camera is far from the thing. All right. And I'm just going to crank this way up to like 50,000. You can be exact about this. I'm not going to care about it right now. And then the real crucial thing is this angle for where we're offsetting this camera.
Right.
And this doesn't come from something I made up. This is actually, like, you can look up on Wikipedia what the angles are to make something look isometric, and this is what it is. You can do this in orientation, or you can do this in the rotations. It's going to work the same. It's up to you. So your X value is 45 degrees, and you can see that offset already. And then we need to offset our Y and Z values as well. The Y one is very specific. It's 35.264. Could you just say 35 and have it look fine? Probably.
But we don't do that on this show. That's not how it works.
It's all about technical precision. And then your Z value is 30 degrees. And once you set that up, you can see all my little squares here being all happy and nicely offset. Let's create just one other little shape for ourselves so that we can kind of see that something's happening. We'll call this shape or sape. I'm sticking with that. And let's just make this say 500 square. And this can be one of our, I don't have our actual brand pink up, but that's close enough to it. And then we'll make this a 3D object. And since we haven't moved our camera, we just rotated, this is going to sit right in the middle of our composition, okay? So basically this here is how I set up my example. And then there are two different approaches that you could take here when you want to be moving around this and rotating, okay? So you could rotate your camera, but you see, this starts getting wonky. Like, each of these, you kind of have this very specific offset already, so you don't really want to mess with those. I will say if I had put those into the rotation values, you'd be able to change the orientation and be okay, but orientation doesn't give you full rotations, only degrees, so that seems a little troublesome. So what I opted to do was actually move the model, okay? So effectively, I've built a static camera and then lights as well once we get to that point, and then I'm moving the model around in front of it for all of my movements. You could, of course, just move this floor, or you could create another null object and call it, model mover or whatever you like. Bring that down here, make that 3D, just to kind of give yourself some freedom here in case the floor itself needs to move or change. So we'll do this. So let's go ahead and kind of point out sort of what's happening here with the values. And we've got this handy dandy 3D gizmo that the After Effects team added in here not too long ago. And this is a nice, easy way to kind of always make sure that you're pulling on one specific axis. But because of the way this is set up, if you just scrub X or you just scrub Y, you're always going to be moving perfectly on that axis as well. And as long as you rotate things in 90-degree increments, you'll always be able to do that. It will get a little confusing, like once you start rotating, it's going to be hard to remember which way is X, which way is Y, but it will all still work. So here is basically kind of a simplified version of my piece, and you can just kind of see what's working a little bit more here. So you can see the loop point, and just to kind of show you, there's a lighting setup of a couple point lights that kind of sit a little further back from the camera. The full one has a handful of point lights just to kind of create a little more dimensionality, and I'll show you that more in a minute if you want. I gave shadows here just to kind of show us that things are actually floating and not. Once you take the shadows away, it starts becoming a little harder to really identify like what's where because of the lack of perspective. It's kind of the point of isometric, but if you don't have faces actually, vertical towards you, it becomes a little harder to see what's what.
Well, yeah, and if there isn't some kind of lighting or shading cue,
Yeah.
right? Like, is it a cube or is it a hexagon, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the I want to say like style and joy of isometric, but the optical illusion of it as well.
Mm-hmm. So Victoria, who is the product manager for After Effects, of course, pointed out that you can switch to the position 3D gizmo view and move in planes too. I believe her.
Well, because you could be working in you'd be working like world axis mode, you'd be working in like object axis mode.
Yep.
So yeah, these are
good things to point out.
The relative, whenever you're in 3D, I think this is something that a lot of people maybe get tripped up on. It's like, well, how am I controlling this thing? Like, well, actually, we can adjust the controller.
Yeah.
Like it can be relative to your view, it can be relative to the world, or relative to the object itself.
Mm-hmm.
Just like when you're scuba diving, if you lose your orientation, you drown.
Yeah. Well, but you know what? There's another newish thing that can really help with that. So there's a couple different ways to deal with, because ultimately, you know, like I said, I'm moving the model around in front of a static camera here, and that can get a little confusing sometimes. Obviously, like these moves, I just made a square and moved around a couple angles of it. That's pretty straightforward. But if you want to get more complicated than that, it can get a little messy. So one way to deal with that is to make a second camera in your composition, and you could just call that working or something like that. And this can literally, you know, go anywhere that you want, and you can use that as a secondary view to help yourself see where you are and understand what's happening. And so that's still very valid, and I did that while I was making this. But there is another option now, as of a year and a half ago or something like that. Probably not that long. Victoria can correct me if she cares. Now, when you're in, as long as you're using the classic 3D mode, you can enable draft 3D, which will knock down the quality so that you can work faster. And you'll see, like, you know, there's some chunkiness here, but this is just a working view. But crucially, one thing it allows you to do is there's an extended viewer, so you can see beyond the rendered canvas here and actually see your entire scene, and not just what's in your canvas. So this is hugely helpful when you're building something like this, where you kind of need it all to just exist, and then you're just kind of moving around in what's there, right?
Yeah, and I think like some people have said that they're hoping that the extended viewer will also be available for like 2D layers, because a lot of the times we're moving around a thing that is larger than the thing we're looking at. Before we get too far down the road, Kyle, I think this is one of our fun Zoomisms. Are we on optimize? Let's de-optimize.
You want to de-optimize?
Yeah,
okay.
Let's go back to de-optimize. I can never tell which one is the superior of the two.
Well, yeah, whichever one we don't choose this day, that is the better one.
Yeah, exactly. We're nailing it. I just noticed that it was, what Kyle's talking about is a little bit getting further out of sync with what he's doing.
Yes. So let me turn Draft 3D back off so that you can see a little bit better. And as you saw from my working view, this is just a big square. Right. And you can see this is your overhead view of the thing rotating around and then moving and then rotating and moving. What I opted to do here was actually use the mover null, just like I showed you a minute ago, and I actually animated the anchor point instead of the position, so that my rotation, my pivot point, would always be traveling with me. Right. So if I kind of scrub through my scene here, you'll see I'm animating my anchor point. And if you look at the values, remember how big my floor comp was, Evan? 6,000 by 6,000. That means the middle of that would be 3,000, 3,000.
Yes, 3,000.
And so 3, if I want a square that's centered in that, I could go at 1,500s everywhere. So 1,500, 1,500, and then you add 3,000 to that to get across. Anyway, I just made a big square like that. So the values are pretty straightforward when you have an easy square.
That's
So-
right. The values are easy when you're a square.
When you're a
That's,
square.
yeah.
So you'll see we're moving from minus 1500, minus 1500, and then we move to 1500, minus 1500. But our pivot point is traveling with us, and so then we can just rotate and then go to the next one. So Evan,
Yeah.
If you would, do you have any guesses why this yellow circle is sitting below the road right here? And why,
Oh.
I don't know.
Why yellow below road?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the yellow is at 0 and the floor is at 0. It's probably because I set the road at minus 0.1, which is a common little trick here. So when you have a bunch of things that are all on the exact same plane in 3D space, a common cheat is to just like elevate them like 0.1 pixel. So I could elevate this one like 0.2 pixels and kind of force them to appear in the way that I want them, kind of regardless of,
Yeah,
anything
because
else.
because unless you're going to break those apart using like something to break their box, right? Break
like
their,
this,
kapow.
which I actually did. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Just observe further up the layer stack, and you'll see.
Yep.
Like, and sometimes depending on the renderer, you can cause like tearing, like pixel tearing, we would call, when the two objects seem to mesh
Intersect each
through,
other. Yeah.
very unpleasant.
I mean, you're basically seeing the road do that once I turn on draft.
Yeah. Oh, there it goes.
That's all one layer, but it's layers of stuff. This is just multiple strokes on one shape layer, but even within that, it kind of is intersecting itself seemingly. So one thing I did want to point out, this is kind of just a big flat thing, and we are getting some lighting, but it didn't quite feel like it had the right look. So I just made a black and white gradient 2D layer and stuck that in between the floor and everything else. But that does break your 3D binning, which you can see here. See how there's this little break in the bins, and you probably can't see it on the stream, but it kind of like gives you little walls when if I move this like up here, you'll see it kind of breaks this into two different groups now. So I had to be okay with breaking the access to push things below the floor, basically.
Right.
And I was for this look. Do you want to get into any of your stuff, or I can kind of keep going with the Cinema4D renderer in here?
I think before we're too far down the road with that, let's jump over and I'll show how to do it like for real. We'll say.
Whoa. Whoa. I didn't know it was going to be like that.
Oh, yeah, that's right. This is our new skewed version of things. Well, I mean, it's all virtual. None of this is real. But we have the same, the challenge is we're going to rotate around stuff. We're breaking bins. Things are 2D, but they're 3D type of thing. So usually whenever I'm confronted with isometric stuff, my mind goes, we should probably just make that in 3D. We should just bite the bullet. Let's open up a full 3D solution to that. So
typical.
Yeah. I use the most ham-fisted version of this, which is actually named after Kyle. Hamrick Fisted.
Hamrick Fisted.
No. This is a we'll say a bit more like a brute force method, because we're going to do it by just doing it, right? Is the way. So inside of Cinema4D, if you create a camera in here and you come down here and when you look at the attribute manager of your things in Cinema4D, you're going to find orthographic is a type of camera. So inside of After Effects, you'll probably be familiar with perspective, right? And that is the way in which a camera works, like in reality, in the real world, camera work that way. But you can have a fisheye, a spherical, a cylindrical, a stereo, spherical. You can have a specific isometric camera, but that's going to lock it off at those specific degrees that Kyle mentioned. But I have opted for orthographic. An isometric view is an orthographic view. A dimetric view is an orthographic view. But the difference is that orthographic could be anywhere. It's just a total lack of perspective. So that's what we're doing, which I think people can attest is kind of my vibe, having a total lack of perspective.
Yep.
People say it often. But that causes us to have things that are this type of flatness as we pivot back and forth. Now, we're actually using pretty much a similar method. Like the camera itself is not the thing that's being controlled. I have stuck the camera within a null, and the null is what's doing rotating. So the null is sort of like a target. Out there somewhere in the world, the null lives, and it is just going to be moved around. So similarly, we can change our coordinates, whether we want to change things by the world standard or by a more subjective standard. So if I grab that null, I can actually move it sort of around, and you can see that we're panning and sliding. It's exactly the same way as it would have been in After Effects, right? And we rotate the null. When the null rotates, because the camera is part of it, then it swings inside. Now, I was not as exact with my numbos, so I only went -30 on the graph here, so to bring us into this, we'll say isometric adjacent. I really big dogged it, saying that I was doing it for real, and then I did it not for real.
Yep. I figured that would come back to bite you.
I'm out here touting my own horn. But, obviously we don't need to get too into the weeds with this, because really it's, you model the thing, you move the stuff around. One thing you have to really decide on is lighting. So is the lighting relative to our view of things, or is it relative to the world? I've opted to just put some lights out in the space, and you can kind of see, if you look in the top-down view here, the camera moving around, it's got lights, things are animating on and off. We're using cloners and all this stuff. So generally, that's why, in a 3D situation, we can rotate and pivot around this stuff willy and nilly. The world exists, and then we observe it through the thing.
So, Evan, there's a question in the chat. Is orthographic the same as parallel for your Cinema4D cameras?
Yeah, so I think now, why is the word parallel not in there? I think it's because this is a redshift camera. That might be the reason. Because redshift is now the default renderer of Cinema4D. So that's kind of, that's a fun change. But you can always toggle back, and we'll be talking about these things a little bit more. But just so people are aware, if you want to do this in a 3D program, that is the thing that you are looking for. You are looking for the parallel, the orthographic, the perspective-less camera, something that is fictional, we'll say, because we can't have that type of thing in reality, right? Like
True.
That's not how our physical world works.
For you to get far enough away to be able to emulate that in real life would probably mean that you're in outer space or something, and then you're dealing with other optical issues.
You're right. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's just it's a reality bending kind of situation. You could deduce that from you could like reverse engineer like 2 cameras to then.
Yeah.
But, then we're getting into some crazier stuff, Kyle. There's not much to explore in terms of setup here. Like I say, it is create null, stick camera in null, adjust camera to be relative to that thing, and then turn the null. So anyway.
Here's a good question. Could you easily add the grid lines on the floor there in Cinema?
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about that for a bit, shall we?
Oh, not so simple, eh?
Well, okay. So you could use a tile shader, right? As Joseph is saying, right? And that's exactly what you'd be doing. You'd be applying a kind of texture to this, right? And that's pretty much all you would be doing to get the grid down there. If you wanted to apply that in After Effects, this is where things get totally off the rails, because the parallel camera doesn't exist. Even at the most extreme, there is still perspective there. It's imperceptible to most viewers, but there is some kind of perspective happening. Also, it precludes us from being able to simply export the camera data, because it's not going to transmit 1-for-1 in terms of the focal length and stuff like that. So if you want to apply a type of shader to this, let me just rack my brains here. Let's see. Usually, so this is our floor. Now we're getting into some nodes. Let's see. What do we want to do here? Is it a material? Not really. Is it a texture? It could be a brick type of thing that we're putting down, right? A form of brick. It could be a type of tile that we're putting out into the world. And so tile here, you can see it's got like a grout color. So I would say, actually, let's make the grout color like a white.
Mm-hmm.
And we're actually going to make the tiles into like a dark and then a dark, even darker still, darkest, like that. So now this is producing the type of grid that we're looking at. And then we would just kind of pipe this in. We're going to just pipe this into the old color here. And then that'll give us, in this case, a nasty looking color.
Yeah, that's awful.
Oopsie. So let's go into the...
I'm not sure that could have gone worse.
All right, let me just go ahead and render the view here and see what happens. See if that pops up the way we want. Yeah, there we go. We got a grid going on down there. It just looks nasty.
Needs a bit of adjustment.
Yeah. We can get there. We can get there sometimes. Yeah. Let's hope as it spins its wheels. But like this kind of procedural grid, you can definitely produce it in here. If you tweak it enough, eventually you'll get there. But again, this is meant to produce tiles. So like there's a lot of stuff that doesn't really comport to what we're trying to do. So grout width becomes the type of thing. Bevel width, we're not beveling anything. Bevel no. So you're gonna have to tweak it until this becomes that, which can be quite onerous. I'm gonna go ahead and delete that. You could also just import a JPEG, right, of square to put on this thing. So
and you'd want to. I mean, I assume this isn't too difficult, but you just want to be very mindful that you're scaling it properly, applying it to an object of the right size so that that texture is wrapping in a way that
you end up with that like UVW problem. And in terms of like scaling when it comes to grids, in particular, trying to get that kind of centered in our world is the challenge. So this is currently stuck on a plane. And so if you come into the plane and then you come into the property tag over here, we're going to get into, this is the Fong. So we would probably want to just make this editable. And then we get our UVW tag over here, or you can come into the texturing mode, which is up here. So then we'll be able to manually adjust textures around if you need.
There's another suggestion of a subdivided plane with a wireframe material, which makes sense, but it seems like you're adding a lot of polygons to your scene. In that case, I'm not sure what impact that would have.
Unnecessarily, because if they're not actually adding topography, we're just adding them in to have them, which can sort of increase our load and render times on stuff. The other thing to remember is sometimes you get those little triangles on there. So if you leave it at all quads, you'll be in good shape. This is a lot of lingo that 3D people like, right? So so what was I going to say? So that's probably the end of this. We'll get into some of the heart of the question was about glowing. So Kyle, let's kick it back to you and have a look at some of your glowiness, just so we can ping pong it here on the program.
So I feel like I need to do a little bit of groundwork here before I get to the glow, but this will make sense. So you've kind of seen what my setup is here, but I will point out that if you look closely, I am in the classic 3D renderer for this little demo thing that I've been doing, right? And so I wanted ISO City to be a fabulous place with real extrusions, right?
A city on the hill, a Xanadu.
Now, granted, the thing that I built, I could have built with the flat planes of, After Effects solids, but I intentionally wanted to sort of oopsie by mixing the two 3D renderers so that I could kind of explore that workflow. And explain it to you nice people. So this was my original build for the city here. And you'll see that I have the road and the ground, and then I have an empty spot here where that diamond goes later. And you'll notice there's no glow trails in this one either. Then we get to our loop point. This is just two instances of the building. This building is a pre-comp. I built it in that city view and then just pre-comped it so that it could be one object here. Again, Cinema4D renderer here, Cinema4D renderer here that you're looking at so that I could extrude those objects, get that on the text crucially, because there's no other way to do that in After Effects. But what that means is that you have a trade-off and you lose access to a lot of things like blending modes and like effects crucially. So if you want to be able to add, say, glow onto something that is using the Cinema 4D render, you have to kind of start layering your compositions. So the way that I approached that was after I was happy enough with this, I duplicated it and then stuck this as the bottom of another, like this is the same comp, it has the same camera and lights and all that, but you'll notice that ISO City C4D, that's nested at the bottom here, and this comp is using the classic 3D renderer so that I can use effects and stuff like that. Now, like I said, you know, if you quiz me here, I won't remember what the limitations of the new 3D engine are. I do think aspects of this would be easier in that, but I didn't want to take the easy route today. So this diamond thing and all the little glowy trails that go around it and the glowy trail that leads us here, this is all happening in this composition. Whereas you have this, you know, the other one with the Cinema 4D render, it can be nested in here. And if you wanted to, you could make expression links to the different keyframes and the cameras and lights and anything like that. So it's not all that different from the way that if you build something in a 3D app, you might export it to After Effects in layers and then be able to composite some of those things and add glows to certain isolated layers in here. So I'm kind of taking that same approach. But I don't know what's happening in the chat. Something very strange.
Apparently, we're able to harm people with our thoughts and ideas. So powerful. Do let us know though if there is. I don't know. We're trying to get the screen share stuff going good. So you people let us know if there's a quality degradation going on. But there is actually a real question in the chat.
Oh, good.
What about compound arithmetic? Sorry, compound arithmetic.
Uh-huh.
No, compound arithmetic. Is that what it's called?
Arithmetic.
It's arithmetic. Right. Okay, good. But you put that on a solid, and then you link that to the extrude shape and then put effects on that. Is that a way to do it?
So you absolutely could. And I have explored things like that before, where you create, you could create, say, this building, and you could have this object built in the Cinema 4D renderer only in this composition, and then kind of use that as a thing in other comps. You would, the trick there is that you would have to have a camera in here that is kind of linked out to the others so that you keep your perspective accurate. Right. But what they're asking about, there is an effect called compound arithmetic. I'm just going to see if I can very quickly give you a demo of it. So I'm going to create one shape layer, two shape layers, three shape layers. Okay, see, those are three separate layers. I'm going to go ahead and just turn those off, though. Using that compound arithmetic effect, you can layer up multiple layers onto one, basically, if you needed to create, say, a mat or something. So I'm going to do shape layer one, and I can get that. And then I could do a duplicate version of this effect and then point that to another thing. And then once you start adding this on, so you have various blending modes that are all set inside here. So you can start layering up other layers so that, say, this solid now could be a mat of multiple other layers. It gets a little abstract, but there are times where this is very useful to be able to combine the mats of multiple layers into one.
Right. You're basically creating, it's like pre-composing, but not really.
Right. It's a little wonky, and admittedly, the name compound arithmetic, I think, scares a lot of people off.
It's doing a lot of heavy lifting. That's great.
But it is very useful when that's what you need. So glows. I was supposed to be getting to my glows. I wanted to make sure I explained the sort of the layered setup that I have here. But so that's how I have this layer, which let me see how high I can get my resolution and still. So where is my yellow trail here? You can see it has just the good old glow effect on it. But that's how I have this. You'll notice I was kind of clever here, or call it cheating, whatever. This thing does not directly interact with those objects that were built in the Cinema 4D version. It kind of cleverly avoids touching them, just ever so barely. And then it comes here to this thing, and this is all built with After Effects flat solids. My little diamond here is just a bunch of shape layers that are kind of angled together in just the right way. So I don't know how much this answers your question, but it is a solution. If you are able to plan all of this out, this would definitely be something where you'd want to kind of make sure that you have everything figured out before you start breaking this out into these multiple layers, because it would get pretty hard to kind of think back and forth and navigate things, and you are going to have to do some matting if things need to kind of intersect each other.
Yeah.
So this is not going to be a solution to everything, for sure.
Now, we could also, if the thing is, I just need to put a glow over top of it, right?
Uh-huh.
We could just put an adjustment layer down and slap a glow on that, right? Like,
well, not in the Cinema 4D renderer.
Yeah. Or we take that comp and we put that into something else, so it's being treated only as footage.
But yeah, if you wanted the whole thing to glow, then absolutely you could. But that's
we're restrained by it's only going to respond to the values of that thing. Yeah,
right.
So it's going to blow out stuff that probably we don't want it to blow out.
One more crucial thing that I'll point out here is that all of my lighting is happening within the Cinema 4D render composition as well. I'll just kind of quickly show you what I built here. So there's that flat building. There's just a handful of squares that are extruded to varying depths, and then here is one point light up top, another point light to one side, another point light to the other side, and then a little bit of an ambient light to just kind of bring everything back up to where you want it. So this is 3 point lights. You could certainly do whatever other lighting scheme you wanted. And again, in this case, the lights are static. They're just kind of sitting in the same spot at all times, as is the camera, and then the model is being moved around in front of it. So would this lighting setup work for everything? Maybe not. In this case, where my main subject was always going to be basically centered up, that's very workable here. But you may need to figure out how to have your lights track with the model, for example, or create another null that moves only the lights, and then you could angle them specifically. It's kind of a question of how deep down this rabbit hole you need to go for your specific thing.
It's true. Okay, so we've talked about your glows.
Did they meet your standards, Evan?
Well, I mean, I was going to say maybe we should jump over to Cinema 4D and we'll talk about
the real way to do it.
Well, I don't want to say real. I mean, we're going to experience various levels of unrealism here coming up. So, just to kind of set the stage a little bit, right? So a glow operator is really just saying these things are of a certain brightness, therefore we will project glowness from them, right? So if we have a peruse of the actual render that I clomped out for this thing, so this is coming out of Redshift. This has glowing happening in it, right? So you can see we got some glow. There is glow that is being picked up by the renderer by default. That
all happened with the thing you sent out of Cinema.
Exactly. So, and this is with just default settings. The things are bright. The stars at night are big and bright in the heart of Texas. That's for one person in the chat. And but you can see that indeed there is that bleed of yellow color being emissive. And these materials are not what we were going to call emissive materials. They're just reflective materials. This white here, this is an emissive material. It is itself a light bulb type of object. The floor here is reflective, so that's why it's picking up what's getting coming down on it, right? It's picking up what I'm putting down. But these things are just reflective. This thing obviously has more glow because it is emitting. So that's what we're going to get into. If you wanted to like prevent that kind of haloing from happening, you have to take extra measures to stop it, basically. But jump into Cinema4D. Let's talk about, because not everyone's going to be using Redshift. We are going to move ourselves into the standard, which is no longer the default. So the standard isn't the default. What does that even mean, Kyle? So in here, we got no materials, right? We are materialless. These are just a naked plane. Yeah, sphere, a nude sphere, cube, and plane. And so I'm going to put out there, give me a regular style material, and I'll put that on the plane, right? No, not much has changed. So let's just see, go ahead and tap the old renderer, right? Everything's looking fine and normal. So let's go ahead, let's give this a color, like a nice kind of dark purple color. There we go. Nice, cool floor. Let's make another material, and we'll put this on the sphere. And we're going to make this, we want this to be like a light bulb, right? We want it to be as bright as possible. So we don't need color. We don't need reflectance. What we do need is luminance. So we're going to call this luminance here. I mean, yeah, probably don't pronounce it in that classic Transylvanian accent. No, that's, look, I've not been to Romania, but that is not what a Romanian accent sounds like, even close. Also, is Dracula supposed to be from Romania, or was...
Well, you may not be aware of this, but sometimes over the course of hundreds of years, the boundaries of countries can be a little bit fluid.
What?
Yeah.
Or is this a case where the author of Dracula was just imagining a place that he'd never been to? Like,
well, that could be the case. We are, of course, talking about Bram Stoker, who has a pretty objectively cool name.
Yeah, Bram Stoker over there. We could just be happy that he didn't name him Bram the Impaler or something. That would be... So this is said to be luminance. So on this luminance channel. So let's render this and what it looks like. So this has like shading going on. This does not. But as far as light bulbs go, I'm not seeing a lot of light coming off of it. Why? So that all comes down to needing to add more information into your renderer. So we want to add an effect that we would call a global illumination. It's not Halloween anymore, but still.
Yeah, you can still be spooky.
Sure. So here we go. Now, because we are allowing global illumination, the things that emit, such as the luminance channel, are now casting. Yeah, that's right. You have to be in the chat setting us straight on Romania facts.
Yeah, so. It's probably better that you missed it. I'm sure it was mildly offensive to Romanians.
I suppose everything we do is mildly offensive to somebody, I guess. That's
Probably.
Not true. We run a clean ship.
We do try to run a pretty clean ship around here.
We're not some kind of edgy program. Which also, hey, if we ever overstep, you let us know. I'm quick to apologize. I'm from Canada. So here, you see, hopefully people can see that like burp. Like there's a thing that's happening before it actually renders, right? There's like a whole bunch of little dots out there. And that is calculating the photons coming off of stuff like this and bouncing off of this and bouncing off of that and causing this. But we are not yet at glowing yet. So no glowing has happened yet. So let's come back into our settings and let's add an effect and glow. Oh, there it is, right under the G's. So a glow. So if you click on the glow, you're going to see, well, these are settings almost identical to what you're going to find in After Effects, right? Size, intensity, back intensity, luminosity. This is, so dial in like the color, distance, surface, and amount of noise. You can induce noise into this thing. But let's just go ahead and hit render on this. And you're going to see, hey, look at that. We're getting a little bit of glowiness happening around the margins on this. So this is inducing a glow into the renderer itself. So it's part of the system. The image that is spit out of this already has a glow on it. And the glow is based on the illumination of the stuff that is around. So for example, I'm just going to grab this cube over here and let's put a different material upon that cube. And upon that cube, let's just give it like, I don't know, a fairly bright, so the color is kind of light, and maybe we'll give it like a light pink color here, something like this. Right?
Pretty close to our brand pink there.
Similar colors. So we're going to give this a little render, and you can see, right, it does not glow, because of course it is not emitting light. It's not overloading the camera with photons, causing that kind of blooming effect to happen to it. So hopefully that kind of spells out what's going on vis-a-vis, I want things to glow in Cinema4D.
So Evan, let me ask a question, because a lot of times with isometric, it's kind of a cartoony, I would say flat shaded, if we're talking about cinema look. And then to be able to have just like glowing lines that move around on top of these flat shaded things that aren't necessarily lighting those things, but the lines themselves would be glowy.
Yeah. So some of the things you may want to think about are like, I don't want these things to interact with each other, right? I don't want this to accept lights. I don't want this to be accepting things that happen to it. So you may want to come into your add a compositing tag to something. And so you can see that we've got like, you can take things out of the reflections. You can take things out of refractions. You can have it not accept shadows, for example. But critically, you can also send things out in an object buffer. So what you may end up doing is sending different objects out as separate rendered kind of passes of the thing. So these things will be independent of these other things. That might be something that is worth considering.
So you could have one export, not too dissimilar from what I did. You could have one export that is your ground plane and your city, and then another one that is just the lines. And then say you add those glows to the lines in After Effects.
Exactly. So it's kind of, it's a similar methodology that we are splitting things apart at more of like a system level. So it's like the same camera is moving through the scene. And really, if you're using the object buffer, you can send it all out in one file. And that can be just part of like a multi-layered EXR file. Now I'm really pushing my glasses up, but those are options that are available to you coming out of most kind of, we'll say full 3D applications, because of this exact need to abstract things. To talk a little bit more about abstraction, though, you mentioned flat coloring of things. So if we hit the old render on here, let's actually add another light into the world.
Please do.
Yeah. So we're going to get a point light up in the space. So you can see how the point light is adding its own deal out here. Well, what's going on now is it's lighting, but it's like real lighting, and that's bad. That's making me unhappy. So what I'm going to do is I would like this to be a light, but I want like a less real type of light. So I'm going to come down to type, and I'm going to say, so Omni, that's your point light, spotlight, area light is probably the closest to real lights. I want an infinite light, And an infinite light is a light where the photons only travel in one dimension, one tunnel, one vector, which allows me to then have a lot more sort of fine control over the lighting situation. And you can see how the cube is like 1, 2, 3 sides now, because the photons only travel in that one direction. And real light making Ethan unhappy is true vampire vibes. The soft glow of the halogens are exactly what I desire.
And to address a comment from Joseph just now, yes, this is available to watch later. As soon as this is over, it takes about 10 minutes or so to process, but then you could reload and hit play on this as soon as it's processed. You
can enjoy for all time and all space.
Just watch it on a loop forever.
Yeah, in a sense, the video itself becomes something of a vampire, an undying creature, consuming time, I guess, is what
it
feeds on. So anyway, that's the parallel light. That is the infinite light. You'll see it with different names in different applications, but the idea is maybe it's some people say like a cylinder light, they call it. But the idea is it's a light that only travels in one vector only, which allows us to have like realistic shading but unrealistic lighting, or realistic
you can
materials.
Control it in unrealistic ways.
Yeah, otherwise what you want to be doing is actually selecting your object, probably breaking it up into chunks, and then selecting various surfaces and applying texture only to those. You can assign all kinds of selection areas and that'll enable you to say create selection. Where are you on here? Store selection. You get this little triangle here, and then that can be addressed with specific materials. So we'll just snap this on the cube, and we'll say, hey, which selection might I interest you in? And then I'll say, you can interest me in this selection, please. So you can, yes, right, a little mix and pick over here for us. But you're able to then select in different ways. And the selection can also be procedural. So you can say, select this face, select this edge. But you can also say, select the cap, select the extruded part, stuff like that. Let's see. Yes, David, that is indeed our stance on immortality. That if you cannot expire, what joy is there in life? I'm going to say probably a lot. They're probably laughing it up because they don't have to pay for health insurance.
Speaking of expiring, I know we're getting pretty close to our time here. Yeah. If there are any final questions, anything that you would like us to say, poke into a little bit further? They're necessarily some things that we kind of gloss over and explain quickly. So if there's anything else you'd like to see in a little more depth before we wrap things up, then please do. But of course, after the show, give us a little bit of time, but you can always download project files. I will at least be making mine available today. I can't speak for Evan, but we try to make as many of these. Yeah, we try to make as many of these available as we can so that you can poke around in them and explore and better understand the way that these were built, if that is helpful to you. And of course, you can come back and watch this episode again. You can watch other old episodes, all on motiondesignhotline.com, a completely free website experience for you. Unless, of course, you want to be part of the Cool Kids Club and acquire yourself a very neat Motion Design Hotline hat. Those, unfortunately, are not gratis.
Look, we got to charge for some things. And
we do.
Oh, why did I make that so small? Ouch. Look, the hats rule. The hats are great.
Maybe your head has just gotten much bigger from your assertions of doing the real way, huh?
Yeah. All my big dogging has caused my head to swell. So that's. I'm trying to think, Kyle, is there anything else you wanted to get into isometrically? I don't know. Hopefully we
yeah, I feel like I kind of touched on all the major pieces of mine, but things that you and I take for granted may be utterly confusing to someone else. So that's why I asked if there's anything that folks would like us to get into. I don't think I really explained like the positioning of my lights or anything like that. But honestly, in my example, I kind of built the building and I put some lights up until it, when it looked right. And since everything was going to be sitting in that same center position, I was like, well, that's going to work for the things that I needed to work for. So, I had to, in my example, I had to be mindful about positions, but then as far as the look, I could kind of just tinker with it until it felt right. And then kind of freeform it. What?
Here at the end of the program, we should shout out some of the third-party plugins. Maybe if people are...
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. So
do you have any? I have one loaded up that we can show off, but...
Hold on. You show that one. I'll call up what I was looking for.
So there is one tool that I do own and I have used, so I can tell you that it works for some of the specific stuff we were doing today. So it's by AE Screens, and it's called Isometric. And actually, all of his stuff is on sale right now, so you can get this for a little bit cheaper than usual. But this is just a little panel. Let me just do another quick composition here, and I'll do perspective, just some fancy pants text for us here. It's just this little panel that lives right here in your interface, and it will create a camera, and then you can apply extrusion to a layer. So I'll just do that. Boop. And so now I have a nice isometric camera, and I have this thing that is extruded, but it's extruded in a way that is not using the Cinema4D renderer. So it's a cheat, a fake extrusion, but you can, however, turn it around. And so you could probably build my scene using this tool, or get pretty darn close to it. Ultimately, like my building, for example, is just all flat surfaces. So there's nothing too complex going on there. And that is kind of one thing to call out about my example. Like, if you're already comfortable with After Effects, and you can kind of understand how to navigate the 3D stuff in here, I feel like this is a lot easier to approach than something like diving into cinema, but you will be somewhat limited in, you can make round things like this, but you can only sort of extrude straight. You can do some bending, but you're going to have a limit on the complexity of your objects, right? This is not the place to build complicated 3D things. But you could be bringing in objects using the Cineware plugin. That back and forth is going to get kind of complicated as well. But anyway, that was Isometric. So you could use that to build things like on par with what I built, and perhaps more easily.
Perhaps. Well, I've got two. There's two that are on AE scripts that people might enjoy. So one is called Isometric Rigger. Now this takes a slightly different approach in that it is basically helping you kind of explode artwork into sort of boxes and then move them around. So that's something to consider. Another one that I think is probably very similar. So this is Isometric FX by Fremix. So watch out for this type of thing that you're going to find, like, it's using that kind of making things flat, I believe, using a kind of effects-based approach. And that's why you get things like you have to choose what face something is on, which can be kind of limiting in a way. But they have a 2D solution, a 3D solution. There's some interesting stuff going on. A lot of these can become a little bit script intensive, let's say. So just kind of be aware of that. If you're using it a lot, you can start to end up like, man, I just have a bunch of shape layers out here. Why is my thing going so slow? It's like, well, because it's rigged up with about 100 different expressions under the hood. So every frame there's a lot of things getting evaluated. And Umacord coming in here towards the end. You'll have to catch it on the replay.
Unfortunately late. We're definitely not judging you at all for this.
Never. We're a judgment-free zone, except for each other, and I guess society at large. We stand in judgment. So, I guess that's pretty much it there, Kyle.
You know what? If I can quickly follow up on something that you said. So, yes, a lot of this stuff will, working in 3D in general can become a lot. And anything like this where you're kind of working in a very specific perspective, I would say, and I think the way that my project is built really helps underscore this, you want to kind of step back before you start just building stuff. You want to step back and think about what you're doing. And in my case, that was like, well, I'm going to move the model instead of the camera. It would have been equally valid to move the camera. But then you need to kind of think about, like, what do the lights do? You saw that I pre-composed the buildings so that I could use that in more than one spot. You just want to kind of be thoughtful about the structure that, whether you're using After Effects or Cinema or some other app, take a little time, maybe, kind of build a rough mock-up of what you're trying to do, block your thing out with rough pieces before you get super deep into one of them and then realize that you've painted yourself into a corner, and you don't have access to make the glows, for example, because you used the wrong renderer. So just kind of, think about what you're doing, do some tests if you have the time. If you don't have the time, maybe ask if you can have the time. You
the
know,
other thing is, if we never rotated, right? If we never rotated
Right.
around that axis, this could all be just a totally flat illustration, right?
Mhm.
That just seems to move on the right vectors. It's yeah. If we never had to change from seeing one face to the unseen face, we'd be laughing, man. If you never have to gaze upon the unseen face,
I wish you
it's
had the unseen face.
well, that wish will be coming true quite soon. What was I going to say, Kyle? We're taking December off. That's what I
We
wanted
are,
to
yep.
mention. Speaking of our faces not being seen, so we're going to be off for December while we do holiday stuff, but we will be back in January. So
Mhm.
I think that first Monday in January, we're back on the air. So we will.
Back on the Adobes.
Yeah, it's true. Back on the Adobes. You're not rid of us yet. But yeah, so we have one more sesh, basically. So if you have any quandaries for that are really pressing as we go into the end of the year, let us know. But I think we have,
Or otherwise, we'll just reheat some leftovers.
as we do every year.
So I know that we're about to wrap up here. I saw one question that I could answer in about 20 seconds if we
Okay.
want to do it.
Do it.
There was a quick question about bending 3D objects in After Effects. And yes, I can answer that very quickly. This is in the Cinema4D renderer. Evan, if you could give me my screen for just a second here, I will show that. So when you are using the Cinema4D renderer, you will have the extrusion options on shape layers and text, but you will also get this curvature option right here. And so you can start curving objects like this. And this is just a solid layer. And then you can tell it how many segments you want. So how smooth it is, basically. And then if I actually put a camera in here, you'll see that it is indeed a curved thing, but this is just an After Effects solid. So dive into that and see what kind of weird stuff you can make with that. That'll be your thing to play with over Thanksgiving.
Yeah. And it's really good for like if you're making like a background
Yeah,
element,
yeah.
that type of thing that you're like, I don't want to see the edges of it, or it's betraying that it's flat. So that's what it's good for. And you know what, Kyle? We should clarify. Apparently, the first Monday is January 1st, so definitely not that one. But we'll be back the Monday 4th with after
7th or 8th, whatever.
Yeah,
whatever it would be.
however that works. Anyway, thanks for being with me, Kyle. This is fantastic. It's always great to hang out and nerd out and do this stuff. And thank you, good people of the chat, for being with us. Since we're being multicast on Adobe Live, you're kind of a captive audience sometimes, but we appreciate you not jumping off the stream. So, yeah, until next time, stay creative, be kind to each other, and we will see you all around the internet. Bye for now.
Bye for now. Just for now.
Just for now. For now.